Hello and welcome to today's U.S. Casino Lessons Learned from the COVID-19 Pandemic webinar. For this webinar, attendees will be in listen-only mode. If you need technical assistance, please submit your request under the Tech tab in the window in the top right-hand corner of your computer screen. If you wish to submit a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A window in the top right-hand corner of your computer screen. And we will try to answer all questions during the webinar, but if an in-depth answer is needed, we run out of time, we will try to answer your question at a later time via email. The presentation will now be turned over to Chuck Nervik.
Good day, everyone. I'm Chuck Nervik, Senior Vice President at Media Edge Communications. On behalf of our business partners at the Canadian Gaming Association, we sincerely hope that you, your families, and all staff are well. Welcome to today's Canadian Gaming Summit webinar. It's sponsored today by Nuvei, IGT, and Cambie. Thank you very much for your support. Today's webinar is entitled U.S. Casino Lessons Learned from COVID-19. 2020 was a disastrous year, as we all know, for global gaming and especially for Canadian casinos. Today's webinar will help you prepare for the inevitable reopening of your property by leveraging research insights, best practices, and lessons learned from U.S. operators. We will cover today patron behavior changes, marketing, gaming floor design layout, restaurant food and beverage delivery, and more. We look forward to providing our attendees today with a range of excellent ideas for your reopening planning and strategy. A little bit about today's presenters. We're joined today by Larry Fretz, Gaming Hospitality Practice Lead with Infotech Research Group. Larry brings 20 years of international gaming and hospitality technology and business operations expertise. Prior to joining Infotech, Larry held CIO, VP, IT, and executive leadership positions with Palms Casino Resort, the Cosmopolitan of Las Vegas, and Niagara Casinos, both Fallsview Casino Resort and Casino Niagara. Joining Larry today is Jay Milstrup, VP Gaming Experience, Rush Street Gaming. In the 30 years since his entry into the gaming industry, Jay has opened 3 casinos in the US and Canada from the ground up as general manager, the first when he was only 28 years old. He has led a publicly traded gaming company as its president and CEO, and as GM, Jay opened Casino Niagara Fallsview Casino Resort, one of the largest, most successful gaming operations in North America. Jay has also designed and marketed more than 100 game concepts in table games, slots, bingo, and Class II gaming. We really appreciate the fact that Larry and Jay have joined us today. I've had an opportunity of chatting with both Larry and Jay prior to today's webinar. We know you're going to enjoy it. So the microphone's over to you, Larry and Jay, and enjoy the webinar.
Welcome to the Canadian Gaming Summit webinar series, Casinos in Recovery, U.S. Insights for Canadian Operators. I'm Larry Fretz, the Gaming and Hospitality Practice Lead at Infotech Research Group. I've had the opportunity over the last 6.5 years with them to travel the world and work with CEOs, COOs, Chief Gaming Officers, and of course CIO IT leaders on issues that are pressing for the casino industry. Prior to that, I was the CIO at the Palms Casino Resort here in Las Vegas, as well as the pre-opening CIO for the Cosmopolitan of Las Vegas. And prior to that, I was senior IT leadership at the opening of the Fallsview Casino Resort in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. I'm joined today with Jay Milstrup.
Thanks, Larry. I've been in the gaming industry for almost 40 years. My background includes not only on the manufacturing and supply side, as well as operations in multiple countries around the world, including 6 years spent up in Canada at Niagara Falls. I got into the gaming industry actually as a professional player. So I'm one of the few people in the industry, I believe, that has the perspective from the player, from a supplier, as well as an operator.
Great. Thank you, Jay. The objective for today's webinar is to leverage the insights and lessons learned to prepare for a new normal and clarify the potential business implications for casino operators. The agenda is to walk through, take a virtual interactive walk through the casino. We're going to look at the policies, procedure implementations, the protocols, as well as the business impacts and perspectives as we go through this virtual journey. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to open it up for question and answer. The methodology for this research that Infotech performed over the course of the last year was myself and my team, where safe and while following protocols, we traveled to various regional U.S. casino operators, as well as, of course, here in Las Vegas and downtown, and we looked at what was going on in the casino environment. What protocols were they doing, and then monitoring that from a customer perspective. What was the experience? What was the impact to business operations during COVID? And then, of course, as casinos started to reopen, what adjustments did they make as their capacity increased? The methodology that we recommend at Infotech for casinos that are reopening is to really rapidly identify the reopening new normal operational challenges. Be proactive in that. In March and April 2020, Infotech GHRC's original Casino in Crisis research blueprint and webinar, we identified some concrete steps that, at the time, U.S. operators and overseas, that we explored to a series of concrete steps to inform strategic and operational planning actions about what the post-crisis reality would look like following the steps you see here. And so in order to rapidly identify the reopening new normal operational challenges, you have to obviously plot that path to a new normal. You want to leverage patterns from other markets, which is exactly what everyone's doing here today. You want to assess the behavioral and business models of COVID, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. You want to align the business and the customer experience management. Ideally, use some reference architecture to support your decisions and changes, and we'll highlight some of those. But ultimately, what you're going to have to do is develop some new normal tactics. Now, what's going to be interesting is that a 3-month tactic? Is it a 6-month? Is it a 1-year tactic? And so we'll explore that today as well. And of course, many casinos have been shut down for, in some cases, weeks, months, and in some cases, unfortunately, for much longer, closer to a year or more. And so you need to prioritize your tactics and protocols given the business funding situation. And so what we did as part of this is we put together the operational changes that we at the time in the early days of the pandemic identified. And so this is really an accelerator to identify the likely impacts of various areas of your integrated resort property as they reopen and adjust to the operations in a new normal environment. And so we made these predictions. We put a stake in the ground in the early days saying these are what's going to be impacted. And what we did is highlighted in green here for this audience those that actually came to fruition in the U.S. market. So things like mandated hygiene standards, protocols around temperature checks, money handling changes, plexiglass as an example, as well as the physical and asset optimization aspects. And this was focusing on the slot floor. We also did this for table games, likewise. So what we're going to do is start with the slots. So firstly, starting off with the casino. Based on my on-site observations from a wide variety of casinos in various markets during various phases of the pandemic, realizing that many casinos had reduced capacity and had safety protocols implemented, what you can see here are a wide variety of responses and modifications to the casino floor, from shutting off middle, every other game, as you can see on the right-hand side or on the left, and removing seating, to plexiglass dividers, to physically removing games and seats for social distancing purposes. Jay, how did the customers regulators and your staff respond to these protocols, and what were the operational lessons learned specific to the slot floor?
Well, the response from all three groups was actually different. We had the health officials and the regulators came in because no one had any experience at this point, and more or less mandated space or separation. The staff, of course, responded by trying to create the space by shutting off some machines or distancing them, as you can see in the presentation, or dividing some of the games using the plastic. What we did notice was the positive effect of this was we actually reduced the capacity of our floors in the number of games that were on, and that resulted in an increase in space allocation per slot machine, which actually worked in our favor, to such a degree that as we're in the middle of designing our new casino in Portsmouth, which is going to be opening up in 2022, we're actually doing away with most of the slot banks on the floor and going strictly to carousels and pods, because they give that degree of separation for the players, and the players responded positively to that by playing longer. They were more comfortable, and our win per unit went up.
That's a great news. Did you see any similar changes or different results from the electronic games or the stadium games that you may have on the floor?
We did, but we think it was fueled more by a change in our capacity and utilization on table games. So what was happening as the floor dynamics shifted tremendously in our occupancy and utilization. So we were seeing periods where customers could not access the games because we had fewer gaming positions, and the overflow went to the electronic table games.
Good, interesting. Are the trends the same? You mentioned about players spending more time on machine, longer trips like before, or are these trends and behaviors starting to return more to the historical baseline? In other words, the characteristics that you've just mentioned, do you think they're going to sustain themselves, or are they going to fall back to traditional baselines?
Well, two things are happening. The first is we've changed the way that we operate our casinos, driven by a combination of public safety as well as financial operations. So there were a number of changes that we've implemented that were within our control. Yeah. We're also experiencing forces outside of our control, like in the United States, they passed out the stimulus checks. We saw unemployment shifts. We see restrictions in public transportation, in hospitality. Some of our casinos, we had to cease food, beverage, smoking, valet services. So some of the influencing factors were out of our control, while some of them remained within our control. But what we've seen is, I guess, humiliatingly to ourselves, how inefficiently we actually operated casinos in the past, and how resilient our customer base really was. So when we started opening up, we found that our customers had a much more higher loss tolerance than we had ever imagined that they did. Their response to an increase in minimum wagering restrictions on slots and tables was very high. They were very accepting of that, and we saw that our players were increasing their time in the casino because the casino was open without much competition from shopping, restaurants, and bowling alleys. Yeah. So in the end, what we really realized was a number of factors that we had used to historically manage our casinos by a set of rules were actually very inefficient, and we're seeing an increase in volumetric efficiency of around 15 to 30%.
Wow. And so really challenging those historical industry norms of casino operations in many ways.
Yeah. Nope, yeah. For sure.
So when we go on continue our journey through the casino floor and we start looking at table games, you can see here the various protocols that were implemented for Baccarat, for example, and blackjack. They largely consisted of plexiglass dividers between both the players and the dealer, and there's different models and fixtures, ways of attaching this that gave different separations. But there was also the reduction in player positions. And in some cases, every other table was also closed. So really social distancing. Obviously, that's a dramatic reduction in players and hands. But Jay, you and I share the perspective that this number of positions and this configuration is actually the optimal position count for table games in general. But perhaps you can share what you saw and experienced in your various properties from a table games perspective.
Oh, certainly. And you're absolutely right about the optimum efficiency of a game. All of the studies that had been done historically prior to COVID showed that the maximum number of decisions on a blackjack game, for instance, is somewhere between 3 and 4 players. So with the mandate to go down to only 3 occupants on a table game, what happened was the regulations that were imposed on us actually increased our efficiency, which created another set of problems. Historically, our casinos, when they're not operating at full capacity or we're not going full spread on a Friday or a Saturday night, we tend to overload our games, which dropped our efficiency. So with the restriction of only going to 3 players, we actually increased our efficiency, our win per hour, the number of decisions that we're having per hand per hour. But at the same time, it created a demand for more games to be open to accommodate the same number of players. Yeah. And what we found was the staffing was our biggest problem. When a casino gets ready to reopen, it's imperative that they reach out and make sure that they have the staff ready to come back, because in our case, we were closed for 4 or 5 months and had to reestablish employment with a lot of the line level employees, and that's where we really got hurt. So the games performed well, but our staffing levels fell. We had about an absenteeism rate of around 25%, and some people were just reluctant to come back into the COVID environment at that time.
Yeah, and just along those lines, was there any mandate, either regulatory or just really from a company direction perspective on, in order to come back to work, that they had to be vaccinated, or was it left up to the employee's discretion?
Well, we were open. We reopened all of our properties prior to vaccination being available.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But what we did was, if we had employees that were hesitant or did not want to go into the environment, there was no repercussions for someone who just didn't return to work.
Right.
So for the most part, it sorts itself out like it always naturally does, even if there wasn't COVID, that you have some of the people who are enthusiastic and they feel very comfortable in their working environment and they look forward to coming to work, and you have people that unfortunately look for a reason not to come to work. And we were balancing we really had to revise all of our absenteeism or our personal time off policies and procedures, how they were being enforced, as well as looking at we had to prepare for what we called contract tracing, because we didn't have the vaccinations in place at the time. And if any one of our employees tested positive for COVID, anyone that they were exposed to for more than 15 minutes in a close proximity situation, where it might be in the break room or in the employee dining room, all of the employees that were associated with that person for, within the allotted time, had to go on a mandatory quarantine until they could be tested.
Thanks. As we continue the journey, let's just talk about craps quickly. You can see some protective measures that were put into place. Again, plexiglass around the entire table, to stickers, position stickers around the bumpers, to just putting stickers for position, social distancing positions on the carpet on the floor around the game. Jay, whether on slots or tables, did you see a customer behavior or a demographic shift, such as a more casual gamers or more VIP play? Did you see a more younger demographic perhaps come on in now versus your traditional demographic? What can you share around that?
Well, first off, we didn't see more of anybody coming in, but we did see less of the older customers simply because of the threat that they were more vulnerable to COVID. The plexiglass additions, at first when we put them on and before we opened up, I walked through the casino and I said, there's nobody is going to play these games with the plastic on them, especially roulette, because we had a barrier between the players and the dealers. So it was like playing roulette under your refrigerator. You couldn't even reach the layout. It was just absolutely a horrible situation when we were testing these games. And what we found was, again, because of the especially on craps, the separation of the players and the limit of gaming positions per table, one of our properties, craps win, actually increased 78% by reducing the table down to 6 players maximum.
Wow. And
the customers that we were most concerned with on roulette, because of all of the plastic barriers and everything going on, they actually would swap gaming positions outside of the plastic so they could reach their numbers and put the chips on. So in some cases, our attempts to separate the customers or put barriers up created more interaction with the customer. They were handing each other chips saying, hey, could you bet on this number for me, and everything else. But the amazing thing was the response to the customers who were coming into the casino was favorable. I mean, you have to be ready for a much greater positive response than you can imagine. That the people who were not allowed to go into a casino for 4 or 5 months, when we reopened, all the gamblers wanted to come back in, and they came in regardless of what the barriers were.
Wow, good. Well, that's positive. That's a positive sign. As we continue the journey, and let's look at the players booth, player center. So, what you can see here is on the left that there was a shift to technology. This is where contactless, at least in some of the properties that we looked at, really started to embrace that. They rolled out mobile apps that would allow for self-service. They had kiosks, not entirely contactless, but still breaking down the person-to-person distancing and putting in some cleaning protocols around cleaning the kiosk surface. Obviously stanchions and hand sanitizer dispensers, but then of course also plexiglass between the patron and the employee as well. But are you seeing the same profile of demographic coming in to the properties, Jay? Are you seeing the younger side of any increase with the younger demographic? And are you seeing any difference between perhaps rated and unrated play? Has any of that changed?
Definitely has, unrated versus unrated. The age, not so much, but it was, like I said, the elderly patrons came back less, and it increased slowly as we went through the reopening process. Yeah. But the difference between rated and unrated was phenomenal, because when we reopened our casinos, we didn't know what the response was going to be. We didn't know if we had adequate staffing. The number of gaming positions was being reduced on the floor, so we didn't do any marketing. We cut off all of our reinvestment programs, all of our direct marketing immediately, to just see how the reopening process was going to go. Well, again, what we found out was a surprise on how poorly we operated in the past. As we always knew, an unrated player was worth more than a rated player across the board. So without the marketing programs, we didn't get the response of all of the people who came in primarily because of the marketing programs, and we saw the number of unrated players actually increased over the prior year, the actual number, the flat number. So we were seeing a greater attraction to the people that we typically didn't market to. So we came to the conclusion that our most loyal customers are not the ones in our loyalty program. Our most loyal customers are actually the ones that want to come and participate in our business.
Right.
A side note was we also noticed an increase in the time played and the increase in average bet per spin on slot machines as much as 40 to 45 cents per spin. So we actually had an interesting conversation that said, could you imagine if a year before COVID, we would have walked into the executive office and said, hey, I have an idea to increase our slot revenue by increasing the wager per spin by more than 40 cents. And they say, how are you going to do that? And we turn around and say, well, we're going to shut down our restaurants. We're going to not allow smoking. We're not going to have beverage service. And we're going to stop marketing to our customers and shut off a third of the machines on our floor. I mean, we would have all been fired for saying that. But as we go through the opening process, because of the limited number of gaming positions that we had and how we reconfigured a lot of our slot games to adjust for the minimum bet, so that our higher valued customers would be, they would have more access to the machines, and we catered to them a little bit more. We saw a significant increase in the individual performance and value of our customers.
Wow, that's amazing results. I mean, in many ways, just the pandemic and the reopening is a giant casino lab experiment in many ways. Opportunities to test things that, to your point, you'd be fired for proposing to test in the past. One of the things that I've seen, certainly in talking to our CIO members, is that there's been a large focus on contactless and self-service and really digital and mobile apps and player cards. And you've already alluded to the shifting in offers and promos, but also moving that to digital and mobile channels. Is this something that you're seeing or considering? Obviously, with the reduction in promos and offers, but as things continue to resume, are you seeing an interest in digital? Are you focusing and investing on digital for players?
Absolutely. The one thing that we noticed, especially when I went through Vegas a couple of months ago, my last trip there, the QR codes.
Yeah.
QR codes are popping up everywhere, and even in some of the, the swanky high-end strip locations in Las Vegas, you get in the elevator, every piece of marketing and advertising in the elevator, whether it's a show or a restaurant or whatever you need reservations, the QR codes are really becoming the link to the customer. And I've talked to some of the manufacturers, the slot manufacturers, on the system side, where they're able to produce a QR code on the small displays for the player card displays. So I think that what we're seeing is, even though it may not be to reduce the contact, I think it's forced us to look at technology and the advance of technology much more closely than we would have ever in the past. Something that would have taken maybe 5 to 10 years to integrate into our operations came in overnight. So we're looking at things like our mobile applications, how we expand our mobile applications, what they should be used primarily for. We're looking at card reprinting kiosks, because the majority of the activity that our loyalty program employees do at the rewards booth is reprinting cards and all of the manual process like that. We're looking at automating that, but we're also looking one dimension further, is what does the interaction between the business and the customer, what's that going to look like in the future? And then we're also, Rush Street Gaming is one of the top online gaming operators in North America, especially on the casino side. So we had this huge surge of acceptance to online gaming during COVID that I don't think would have happened without shutting the casinos down for a few months. Yeah. So we're learning on a daily basis what online gaming means to the future of casino gaming. And there's some of the Canadian casinos have some very advanced development and use of online gaming. It's going to be a game changer when they start reopening the live casinos or the retail casinos. The relationship between online and retail is, it's going to be different, and it's never going to go back to the way that it was.
Yeah, and in our early research, the Casinos in Crisis piece, we put out a position that the longer the pandemic goes on, the demographic shift is, the characteristics and behaviors of certain demographics, typically the older demographic, are going to be permanently changed, and in that they're going to be more comfortable with online transactions because they've had to pay their bills, for example, and do their banking online because banks were closed or they couldn't safely get out of their homes to do so. They've had to use Zoom and FaceTime technologies to keep in touch with friends and family. And so they've, just like you were talking about, businesses focusing on digital and really substantial innovation around digital in such a tight time frame, your demographics have also had to do that. So let's continue on here to the casino cage. Again, less protocols and controls, fairly similar to Players Club with social distancing and stanchions. Are you seeing, Jay, obviously one of the key pieces here in the US has been the push to cashless. Do you really see that as sustaining and continuing on post-pandemic, or is it really more of a knee-jerk reaction because of COVID?
No, we were experimenting with electronic wallets before COVID hit. And ironically, one of our casinos, we had a restriction on contact with cards and chips that we had to accommodate for. We had to clean the chips frequently. Yeah. And what we found was the casinos or the players who prefer going into the live environment, especially in table games, the cards and the chips are part of the experience. And we had a real negative pushback from our customer base when we changed basically just the experience of the chips and taking them off the table and washing them and how we were distributing them. So I see electronic wallets expanding in the casino footprint. I see us relating that to people's online gaming accounts. There's no question that we're going to go in that direction, but there's just something about watching a customer feed $100 bills into a high-limit slot machine, that there's a little bit of status and esteem that goes with that as a player. When you're in a high-limit room, you want to have the bigger bankroll. Roulette players, you're never going to do away with the chips at a roulette game because, again, that's kind of the scoreboard, how they like to accumulate the biggest stack of chips in front of them. So, in some cases, we're seeing accelerated acceptance of electronics, especially electronic wallets. Yet at the same time, the industry has to realize the importance that things like cards and dice and chips play in the role of just operating a casino.
Yeah, I mean, like anything, or like many things, I should say, during the pandemic and COVID is things have changed, and it's not always an all or nothing. So I think cashless, to your point, is there's a segment where a segment of the demographic that'll use it. There's others that won't, and even on the casino floor, there's certain areas where it makes sense, and others where it just fundamentally changes the experience.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Let's look at the food and beverage because obviously, and you've alluded this earlier, but a lot of these casinos that have had to reopen that we saw in Oklahoma and California and certainly here in Vegas, their amenities were shut down, right? No hotel, no food and beverage, or dramatic changes to food and beverage operations to really take out or more of a quick serve type of concept. But what you can see here in some of the images is obviously the restaurant host stand has changed with plexiglass and sanitizing dispensing and placement stickers for social distancing. But exactly to your point about QR codes popping up everywhere, instead of physical menus, they've gone to these virtual QR codes on the tables with social distancing and removing of tables within the restaurant. But now I just take out my phone, I scan the QR code, and then I have the virtual menu. And some of the properties are actually taking one step further. Not only can I scan it, but I'm actually able to place my order through the same interface on my phone. So again, fairly dramatic changes to restaurant operations and nightclubs and even the bar tops, right? Is you have slots on the bars, and they went with the plexiglass protocols there as well. But Jay, have you seen, from an F&B perspective then, any additional protocols or impacts and what that's really done to restaurant volumes and spend and profitability?
Oh, yeah. The hospitality industry, especially the food and beverage side in the United States, was just destroyed. Yeah. And again, as we had a staffing problem on table games, it was amplified as we tried to reopen our restaurants. The restrictions on proximity, and every one of our jurisdictions actually treated the food and beverage service and departments differently. So we were faced with a wide array of changes to the way that we were doing business and how we had to accommodate seating the customers and going through everything. So what we found was in our mass volume, the food court, the coffee shop, the type of restaurants, we were able to change by using the QR codes, getting rid of a lot of the manual process, and restricting the menus. I think that buffets were wiped out. And as we look at the expense structure of the buffet, which was predominantly a facility just to provide comps, a lot of low-cost comps to a lot of players in the casino industry, I don't think buffets are going to come back because we've now operated with such a limited marketing budget, and we found out that we actually do better with less marketing. And then at the same time, that's reducing our level of comps that we're handing out, so there's less need for the buffets. You're going to see a financial dynamic change in the way of all of the food services. Now, the bars, we're not allowed to have groups of people congregate in some areas more than 6, in some areas more than 8. So the whole concept of the bar and the lounge just really doesn't exist, and it's really a service now just for the floor. And most of our floors that had a mask requirement in place, we weren't allowed to have beverage service on the floor because the people would have to remove their masks to have the drink, and we couldn't do that. So the food and the beverage industries or segments of departments of our casinos are still not even close to a partial recovery.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, I just saw a headline last week, I think, that Bacchanal at Caesars is reopening after a huge renovation. So it'll be interesting to see how the buffet service there has changed as part of that renovation. Are they going to more like carving and serving centers or pre-sized, pre-prepared dishes, then sort of serve your own? A couple buffets were sort of merging the concept of buffet with traditional restaurant service, where you would ask somebody and the server would go get the food for you. So I think there's lots of experimentation going on, and it will be definitely interesting to see what happens with that staple of the casino experience of the buffet.
Yes.
As we go on and look at the hotel front desk, again, lots of changes depending on the protocols. Different casinos put in actual temperature sensors and screeners. They had self-service check-in kiosks with sort of self-measuring, self-temperature checking devices. Certainly plexiglass in many places between the guest and the front desk agent. Mobile, portable check-ins. And then, as you already mentioned as well, valet, of course, being largely shut down due to COVID as well. But Jay, what's your experience with and without the hotel during the pandemic? And in many jurisdictions, the occupancy limits are expanding. And I guess the question really is, were you able to use the hotel to attract, the VIP player, the comp player? Or how did that change any incentives to your players?
Well, our hotels all went through a period where they were shut down, and trying to reopen the hotels was difficult because we weren't the same attraction that we were before, because there were so many restrictions placed on us, and people just weren't traveling; they weren't going into the public. Ironically, one of the things that we've noticed, and I noticed this also when I went up to Las Vegas, the daily linen service is just non-existent in any hotels right now. Bell services are gone, valet is gone, and the front desk is actually an interesting one, because we've got the plastic separation between the customers and the front desk attendants. And in the jurisdictions where you have an attendant wearing a mask with a face shield standing behind plastic, it's almost comical to watch a customer try to check in, because they can't communicate. It's almost like they have to use sign language with the hotel attendants, because we've created so much separation. And our housekeeping procedures now is a full sanitation or sanitization of the room with the seal on the door. Once a room has been inspected and has been fully sanitized, we seal the room so that the customer knows that no one else has been in the room since housekeeping has been there. It's really a different experience from the customer standpoint, as well as from an operational standpoint. But again, it's having a profound effect on the economics and the financial implications also, that our operations and our expense structure has changed, and a lot of the non-productive positions are just they've been restricted out, or they're not. We don't have them back. We can't offer those services. So believe it or not, our margin performance is just totally different. Yeah. So it's really thrown the hotel management people into a different spin, because you can't manage by the metrics that you were used to in the past. They mean nothing anymore.
Yeah, great point. And we'll touch on that in a moment as well. The public space, again, just a couple examples, and Jay, you've mentioned this already about the elevators, right? Is the parking garage elevators, the hotel elevators, they have stickers on the floor for social distancing. The ATMs in the last of sort of the public space areas, the ATMs, every other one shut off. And in even the restrooms, right? No area of the property is really left untouched by protocols, safety protocols. And in the restrooms, they have plexiglass dividers between the washing stations to help with that social distancing.
Yeah, we've had to take a lot of our facilities in the restrooms and just take every other one of the spaces out of order. We're doing temperature checks of everybody, all of the employees, all of the customers before they enter the property. One of our properties had to issue wristbands to customers that had been, their temperature had been checked. The queues to enter the position or to enter the property became a problem, and the elevator specifically became an operational nightmare, in that once we started restricting elevators to 2 people or 4 people, and some of our properties are serviced by massive parking structures. Yeah. So as it got later in the night, when everybody wanted to leave, even though we weren't doing temperature checks, they had to go into a queue, a line to get in. which we were distancing everybody 2 meters. I did that for my Canadian friends, and I switched over to metrics. We were using the 2 meter spacing, and we had these massive queues to get into the casino. Well, we weren't prepared for the exits using the elevators to get up to the parking garage, and we had massive lines there, and we didn't have any other way to get the customers up to the parking garage. So in the public spaces, managing the traffic flow when we were trying to create distancing and space, we had bottlenecks that were created because of some of the restrictions that really threw us into an emergency mode a couple of nights.
Yeah. And speaking about entrance and exit, here's just as we close out our walk through our virtual walk through the casino floor. Here's a couple of last examples here. So saw a couple casinos that had actual restrictions on entrance and exit using signage, and so that's to your point, Jay, to limit the contact and manage the flow of people traffic in and out of the property. And then this was an anomaly. I didn't see too many other properties doing this, but MGM, I believe it was at the Bellagio, actually invested and took out some games and built these hand washing stations scattered strategically throughout the casino floor with running water and faucets and drains and obviously pretty substantial construction. But again, it's all about convenience and assurance of safety for the playing public while they're on the property. And so really, Jay, one last question, and we've sort of talked about this throughout the journey today, but we've seen headlines all throughout the pandemic about continued revenue drops in some states like Florida and Louisiana, Illinois as an example. But we're also hearing record-setting, highest ever levels of gaming revenue numbers in states like Oklahoma, California, Michigan, Pennsylvania as examples. And so despite having to operate with limited occupancy, game capacity, and other amenities, clearly the recovery hasn't been equal across all gaming channels, neither. You mentioned this earlier about, table games are down in generals, but slots are way up. iGaming has been a boom. Sports betting has been a boom. But so what is your perspective on some lessons learned for successful recovery? Because for every example, every positive example, there's going to be a negative example of a jurisdiction that perhaps didn't rebound as high as another jurisdiction. What are some closing operational lessons learned for a successful recovery?
Yeah, it's just keep an open mind, consider all of your options, and there's an immense amount of opportunity available to operators where if you give up and just cave into the restrictions and say that this is going to damage our business, that's really not the mindset. We've been able to find, matter of fact, we're smarter and better operators coming out of COVID than we actually were going into it.
Yeah, I think to paraphrase as well, leverage the data, experiment, and challenge those norms. I think is going to be fairly key to success going forward. And I could talk to you all day long. I know we've gone long. I definitely appreciate the time. And so with that, really, I think we'll open it up for question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Chuck's having a few technical issues, but while he works through that, Jay, it looks like we have a question in the in the comments asking that you mentioned moving slot banks to more pods. Was there any pushback from VIP players wanting to play two machines at once, or couples wanting to sit side by side? I think maybe you answer that first, and then I'll share some of my observations as well.
Yeah, we didn't see anything material, and there also we had to understand that a lot of the players, a lot of our customers were considering that a lot of the regulations and the changes were mandated by government. So they didn't really hold us accountable for a lot of the inconveniences. You're absolutely right. It's a disadvantage if you have people who like to play next to each other. All of our video poker machines, we're leaving those in banks. We're going to be predominantly banks, but we've seen it's more cost effective from a revenue to square footage standpoint, and for a revenue to the actual device number of assets standpoint, to go to a much more spaced out design. So historically, a casino would allocate around 25 square foot per slot machine. Unfortunately, I can't do the metric conversion that quick on this one, so I'll rely on everybody else to do that. But in our new casino, we're going as far as 32 and 35 square foot per casino, almost an increase in 40% more space per unit, which actually allows a much higher customer density in the gaming areas and much more efficiency. So what we're hoping is 1,200 slot machines will play similar to what 1,500 or 1,600 games would play.
Yeah, and when I was on site looking at various properties, it's the little details, because the players will definitely find ways around your protocols. So in some of the illustrations on the slot machines, if you just took away the seat but left all the games active in the bank, the players are just going to grab another seat and put their card in there, whereas disabling a game and taking away the seat will certainly enforce the social distancing. And I think the question is valid, is what's the response to, what's the player response to that? But they find their ways around, and I think they realize the extreme nature of the pandemic that they're in. And I don't know, Jay, if you saw any people. I mean, I don't think. I think the metrics you shared don't support a decline in gaming, right? People want a game on slots. They're going to come and play. If it's two positions or one position, they're spending more time on the game, and they're putting more coin in. So I think, to the person that asked the question, I think it's, I would say, neutral to no impact from the slot player, at least.
So Larry and Jay, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Oh yes, yeah.
Sorry, I was having an Apple iPod issue. So just a quick question, because we're running out of time. That was a phenomenal presentation. Yes. You guys were right. You covered a lot of territory. So the same question for both of you, with a quick answer, if you don't mind. If a Canadian operator was going to ask you guys one question, and that was, what's the most important thing that they should consider doing for their reopening strategies? From your perspectives, without a crystal ball, what would you suggest right off the top?
Oh, easily. The relationship with the staff. We've gone through a period of unemployment. It's almost like a grand opening again. But we're actually bringing our experienced staff in to operate into an environment that no one's experienced before. So we couldn't spend enough time, building the relationship, the training, the communications, keeping the social distancing in the back of the house. The relationship between all of the employees needs to become philosophically closer, but physically farther apart. Which is really tough to do, and that's the number one thing I'd be looking at is, making sure that you maintain a productive relationship with the staff, and that's where we saw most of our problems.
Got it. And Larry, what did you observe in your client observations?
Yeah, I would say those that had more success took a encompassing journey map perspective of the experience, both the employee experience and the customer experience, and plotted that out, spent the time planning in advance of opening all of these touch points and how does that change for the employee and also for the guest. And by planning that out proactively versus reactively, it's going to be a more considerate and enjoyable experience for all involved. And I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to my technology roots and say, look at technology and how it can streamline and automate a lot of these processes, because I think one of the things that's been observed is the barriers between the friction and the barriers between players and gaming and players and the employee aren't as much of a barrier, right? And aren't as much of a friction as we would have traditionally held. And there's opportunities in there for technology to, I think, fundamentally change and support that customer journey in the new normal going forward.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. That was very good. And we'll do some closing remarks. And for all of you that have joined us today, stay tuned for our closing remarks next. Thank you very much for joining us today, Larry and Jay, and for your excellent, timely, and relevant presentation. Please note that a recording of today's presentation will be sent to you that can be shared with your team and industry colleagues. We will also post the webinar recording link on the Gaming Summit website. Please plan to join us for our next Canadian Gaming Summit webinar on June 1st, beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The June 1st webinar is our final Summit webinar before the actual virtual Canadian Gaming Summit that will occur on June 9th and 10th. The June 1st webinar will be delivered by Sarah Robertson, VP Sales with Canby, and Kevin Cunningham, Competitive Intelligence Analyst with Canby. The title of their webinar is Live and Kicking in Canada, Why In-Game Betting in Hockey Will Be Key Battlegrounds. Canby will present an in-depth look at the importance and popularity of in-game betting and why it has potential to separate the winners from the losers in a regulated Canadian market. The session will also consider what Canadian bettors can expect from a regulated hockey offering, which will feature legal single game and live wagering for the first time. For additional details and to register for our final pre-summit webinar on June 1st and our June 9th and 10th virtual Canadian Gaming Summit, please visit CanadianGamingSummit.com. Please note that your registration includes full access to all our Canadian Gaming Summit webinars this year, as well as the virtual Gaming Summit on the 9th and 10th of June. As you may have noticed, we are providing delegate registrations this year at no charge to help support the entire Canadian gaming industry and to remain connected during these interesting and challenging times. Thank you again to today's webinar sponsors, Nuvei, IGT, and Canby. Wishing you all the very best and look forward to seeing you on June 1st at our next webinar. Take care.